At exactly 03:41 a.m. local time, the geopolitical landscape of the 21st century shifted forever. It began with a synchronized roar across the Iranian plateau as Iran fired a wave of advanced ballistic missiles, tearing through the atmosphere and shattering a decades-old status quo of silent shadow war. On the radar consoles of the IDF's Southern Command, 4 distinct heat signatures appeared, screaming across the border at hypersonic speeds. In a conflict that has seen weeks of brutal bombardment, these were different. Every air defense operator in the country recognized the horror of the math immediately. These missiles were not tracking toward the high-rises of Tel Aviv. They were not aimed at the port of Haifa or the northern Galilee. These warheads were heading deep south, into the heart of the Negev, toward a facility that has been the center of global mystery for over 6 decades. A facility surrounded by the most restricted airspace in the world. A facility where Israel's most closely guarded national secret sits behind layers of electrified fencing and a wall of diplomatic ambiguity. The missiles were tracking the Shimon Negev Nuclear Research Center. They were tracking Dimona. The activation of the Arrow 3 batteries was instantaneous and frantic. This was a saturation defense scenario. 7 interceptors were launched in rapid succession, tearing into the night sky to meet the incoming Iranian IAEA ballistic missiles. 2 were neutralized at high altitude. A third fragmented, its debris scattering across the sand. But the 4th missile found the gap. Because the defense systems had been depleted by the first 3 targets, the 4th warhead descended through the terminal phase without opposition. It struck the ground approximately 800 meters south of the main IRR-2 reactor building. 800 meters. In military ballistics, that is a near miss. In the world of nuclear safety, that is the closest the Middle East has ever come to a man-made sun. The 750-kilogram warhead detonated on impact, creating a massive 12-meter crater. No radioactive material was released this morning, but the red line hasn't just been crossed, it has been erased. To understand why a missile landing 800 meters from a desert building has sent gold to $4,500 and oil to $150, you have to understand exactly what sits in that patch of sand. Israel's policy of Amimut, or nuclear ambiguity, means that most of the world only knows what the shadow tells them. Dimona was born in the late 1950s out of a covert pact with France. Its centerpiece is the IRR-2 reactor, officially built for peaceful research. However, the global intelligence consensus, supported by the famous 1986 whistleblowing of Mordecai Vanunu, is that Dimona is the primary production site for Israel's nuclear arsenal. It is believed to house the plutonium separation plants and the tritium production systems required for boosted fission weapons. Analysts estimate the stockpile at anywhere between 80 and 400 warheads. For 60 years, the world operated under a gentleman's agreement. Israel wouldn't admit to having them, and the international community wouldn't force the issue. That consensus died at 3:41 a.m. this morning when those Iranian missiles broke through. What makes the 800-meter impact so terrifying is the specific vulnerability of the IRR-2 reactor. This is an aging facility, nearing 60 years of operation. Recent reports noted over 1,500 defects in the reactor's aluminum core. Unlike modern reactors with massive containment domes, Dimona's older architecture was never designed to withstand a direct hit from a 750-kilo high-explosive warhead. If that 4th missile had drifted less than a kilometer to the north, we would not be talking about a near miss. We would be discussing the Negev exclusion zone. 6 hours after the impact, the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, in Vienna, issued a statement that effectively ended 60 years of Israeli nuclear history. Director General Rafael Grossi convened an emergency session and, for the first time in the history of the agency, issued a formal grave concern notice regarding an uninspected site in Israel. The IAEA statement was cold and clinical, but its implications are revolutionary. It cited unacceptable risks to nuclear safety and, most importantly, radiological risks to civilian populations across international boundaries. That phrase, across international boundaries, is the key. It changes the legal status of Dimona from a sovereign Israeli secret to a regional safety hazard. For decades, the IAEA has quietly asked for access and been quietly rebuffed. Now they are demanding it on the global stage. The agency is asserting that the safety of the Dimona reactor is no longer an internal Israeli matter because a breach would affect the entire Middle East. This has provided immediate diplomatic ammunition to Russia, China, and Iran, who are now calling for an emergency UN Security Council resolution to force IAEA inspectors into the Negev. Israel's response has been one of defiant isolation. The Israeli ambassador in Vienna rejected the call, labeling the IAEA's move as politically motivated and operationally irrelevant. However, the moral high ground of nuclear ambiguity is rapidly eroding. A country that refuses inspection while its nuclear reactors are being hit by ballistic missiles occupies a very different legal space than one doing so in peacetime. The diplomatic shield that the United States has provided for Israel's nuclear program for half a century is showing signs of structural fatigue. Even traditionally staunch allies in Europe are wavering. France, which helped build the reactor, issued a statement supporting the IAEA's right to assess safety in conflict zones. This suggests a global shift. The world is becoming more afraid of a dirty nuclear accident than they are of the political fallout of challenging Israel's nuclear opacity. Now, let's look at the numbers, because the markets always tell the truth before the politicians do. This morning, gold didn't just rise, it staged a vertical breakout. Gold is the ultimate fear barometer, specifically for nuclear risk. When the news broke that a warhead had landed inside the Dimona perimeter, investors fled every other asset class. Gold surged 4.7% in a single session, crossing the psychological barrier of $4,500 per ounce. This is a nuclear premium pricing model. The market is no longer just betting on a standard war. It is betting on the possibility that the Middle East's most productive region could become a permanent exclusion zone. This would mean the end of the Levant's economy as we know it. Simultaneously, Brent crude has screamed toward $157 per barrel. Why $157? Because the market is pricing in a supply and contamination risk. If the Negev is contaminated, the logistics of the entire region, from the Mediterranean pipelines to the Red Sea shipping lanes, face an insurance nightmare. Marine insurance premiums for vessels in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea have tripled in the last 12 hours. Some major shipping firms are now refusing to dock in Israeli ports, regardless of the price. The S&P 500 futures dropped 2.8% before the opening bell in New York, and Asian markets closed in a sea of red. We are seeing a structural flight from risk that dwarfs the 2008 financial crisis. This is what we call the nuclear economic reset. It isn't just about the price of a barrel of oil. It's about the total loss of trust in regional stability. If the most defended site in the Middle East can be reached by a conventional warhead, then no infrastructure, no data center, no desalination plant, no oil terminal is safe. The Iron Dome was supposed to protect the economy. Today, it proved that it can be saturated, and in a globalized economy, a 92% interception rate is a failure when the 8% that get through are aimed at a nuclear core. This brings us to the Dimona Paradox, a strategic trap that neither Israel nor Iran can easily escape. For Iran, the 800-meter miss was a proof of concept. They have demonstrated that they can penetrate the most advanced air defense system on Earth and put a warhead on target. Iran does not actually need to hit the reactor to win this round of the war. By merely proving they can, they have turned the Dimona reactor into a liability for Israel. Every future missile salvo now carries the implicit threat of a radiological event. Iran is using Israel's own secret weapon against them. They are essentially saying, your deterrent is now your greatest weakness. Every time you strike our infrastructure, we will roll the dice with your reactor. This is a new form of nuclear hostage-taking, where the hostage is the facility itself. For Israel, the options are equally grim. Option 1. Continue operating the reactor and accept the statistical certainty that, eventually, an Iranian missile will hit the core. Option 2. Shut down the reactor. This would take several days, and would be a massive strategic admission of vulnerability. It would signal to the world that Israel's invincible shield has been broken. Option 3. Accept IAEA inspectors. This would effectively end 60 years of nuclear ambiguity and open the door to international regulation of Israel's most sensitive military secrets. The Israeli security establishment is currently locked in a heated debate. The Hawks are calling for a response of unprecedented magnitude, a veiled reference to the Samson option. They argue that the only way to protect Dimona is to threaten the total destruction of the Iranian state. The realists, however, argue that a nuclear exchange would be the end of Israel as a functional society, regardless of who wins. The 800-meter crater has forced a conversation that Jerusalem has avoided for generations. How do you protect a nuclear program that the world isn't supposed to know exists? To understand the weight of the unprecedented magnitude threat, we have to look at the Samson option. This is the informal name for Israel's alleged last resort strategy. If the state is facing total destruction, it will use its nuclear arsenal to take its enemies down with it. Named after the biblical figure who pulled down the pillars of the temple to crush his captors, the Samson option is the ultimate deterrent. However, the Begin doctrine traditionally focused on preventing other regional powers from going nuclear, as seen in the strikes on Iraq's Osirak in 1981 and Syria's Al-Kibar in 2007. Today, that doctrine is being turned on its head. Israel isn't trying to stop a reactor from being built. It's trying to stop its own reactor from being blown up. The strategic shift here is profound. If Israel moves toward selective disclosure, admitting to its nuclear capability to reinforce deterrence, it risks losing its unique diplomatic status with the United States. The U.S. has been able to ignore Israel's nuclear status only as long as it wasn't official. If Israel goes public to stop Iranian missiles, the U.S. may be legally forced to reconsider its aid packages under various non-proliferation laws. Iran knows this. Tehran is playing a three-dimensional chess game. By threatening Dimona with conventional weapons, they are trying to force Israel into a nuclear outing that would isolate them from the West. It is a brilliant, if incredibly dangerous, strategy of escalation to de-escalate. If the world becomes terrified of a nuclear war, they will force a ceasefire on Iran's terms. Let's talk about the science of the near miss again, because the media is getting it wrong. They are showing you photos of a hole in the sand and saying all is well. But nuclear safety experts at the Union of Concerned Scientists have a different view. The IRR-2 is a heavy water reactor. This means it uses deuterium oxide as a moderator and coolant. Unlike light water reactors, heavy water systems are particularly efficient at producing plutonium-239. However, they are also under high pressure. A 750 kSm warhead hitting the cooling pipes would cause a loss of coolant accident, LOCA. Within minutes, the fuel rods would begin to melt. Because the reactor is nearly 60 years old, the aluminum cladding on the fuel is brittle. A meltdown at Dimona wouldn't be as large as Chernobyl, but the proximity to population centers makes it a unique nightmare. Beersheba, a city of 210,000 people, is only 40 kilometers away. Depending on the wind, a moderate release would require the immediate evacuation of the entire southern half of Israel. The psychological impact alone would end the Zionist dream of a safe haven for the Jewish people. This is the asymmetric risk that Iran is exploiting. They are risking a desert crater. Israel is risking its national existence. The IAEA's mention of transboundary risk is also based on the specific geography of the Negev. The reactor is located in a basin where winds frequently blow toward the east and south. A contamination plume would cross into Jordan within 45 minutes. It would reach the Saudi border in less than 3 hours. This isn't just an Israeli problem. It's a regional catastrophe waiting to happen. The IAEA's emergency statement was a signal to Jordan and Saudi Arabia. Your air is now a matter of Israeli military defense. We are also seeing a massive shift in how global intelligence agencies are reporting this. For the last 24 hours, declassified intelligence leaks have been flooding the wires. These leaks suggest that the Iranian Imad missile used in the strike was equipped with a new, Russian-provided guidance system that allows for mid-course corrections. If this is true, it means the 800-meter miss might have been a deliberate warning shot. By hitting near the reactor but not on it, Iran has maximized the political and economic damage without triggering a nuclear response, yet. This is gray zone warfare at the highest possible level. It's a message that says, we can hit the bullseye whenever we choose. This was your one and only warning, Lee. At the same time, the IDF is being forced to pull air defense assets away from Tel Aviv and the northern border to create a steel dome over the Negev. This leaves the rest of the country more vulnerable to drone swarms and Hezbollah rockets. Iran is successfully fixing the Israeli military in one location, stretching their resources to the breaking point. The interception imbalance that JINSA and other think tanks have warned about is now a reality. It costs Israel roughly $3 million to fire an Arrow 3 interceptor. It costs Iran about $100,000 to build an Imad missile. Iran can afford to lose 92% of its missiles as long as that 8% continues to force Israel to spend billions in defense and move its assets. The math of this war is rapidly becoming unsustainable for the Israeli economy. The story of the Dimona breach is the story of the moment the most dangerous secret in the Middle East came within 800 meters of the atmosphere. It is the story of a near miss that has already caused a global economic direct hit. At global context, we look past the headlines to the structural shifts underneath. Mainstream media will tell you the defense systems held, but they won't tell you that the nuclear shield of ambiguity is gone. They won't tell you that the IAEA has fundamentally changed the rules of international law regarding Israel's secret facilities. The reactors are still operating, the missiles are still flying, and 800 meters is not a safety margin. It's a countdown. In the intersection of war and money, the cost of a miss is measured in dollars, but the cost of a hit will be measured in generations. Subscribe to Global Context for our deep dive intelligence briefings. Hit the notification bell, because the next 800 meters will change the world forever. Stay sharp, stay informed,